Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Hello and welcome to episode 59 of Not Reserving Judgment, a podcast about the latest intrigues, triumphs, and outrages in Canadian constitutional law. I'm Josh DeHaas, counsel with the Canadian Constitution Foundation.
And I'm Christine Van Gyn, the CCS litigation director. Joanna is away this week. In today's episode, I'm going to give you an update about the re-education of Dr. Jordan Peterson. And spoiler alert, it isn't going well for the College of Psychologists.
And we'll share our bad legal takes of the week, where we take a lighthearted look at some legal opinions that didn't quite land. But first, I'm going to tell you about the federal government's decision to list a pro-Palestinian charity behind calls for Death to Canada, a terrorist group. So I am, of course, talking about Canada and the United States' joint decision on Tuesday to list Samidoun, the Palestinian Prisoner Solidarity Network, as a terrorist entity, following in the footsteps of Israel and Germany. And the timing of this is interesting because it's just 1 week after that rally in Vancouver, really disgusting rally where Samidoun had organized on the 1 year anniversary of the October 7th terror attack and chanted Death to Canada, lit a Canadian flag on fire, and chanted, "We are Hamas and we are Hezbollah." And this blatant open support for terrorism prompted the BC Conservative candidate for Premier John Rustad and federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre to both call for Samidoun to be listed as a terrorist organization, something that Jewish groups have been calling for a very long time. And being listed as a terrorist entity is a really big deal. It means that rather than being a charity that can take in donations, Samidoun is now illegal to participate in a number of ways. So it's now a crime to give Samidoun members training. It's illegal to recruit for them. It's illegal to, quote, provide a skill or an expertise on behalf for benefit of the group. It's illegal to enter or remain in a foreign country on behalf of the group. And most importantly, it's illegal to deal with the group's property, like their bank accounts, or facilitate donations. And so from now on, you probably won't see as many Samidoun flags at pro-Palestinian rallies or their logos on these all out for Palestine marches. And hopefully police and CSIS will be paying a bit more attention to people who do that. So to understand why Samidoun was listed as a terrorist group, I think it's important to remind ourselves what terrorism actually is. According to the criminal code, terrorism is doing anything violent that causes death or serious bodily injury, or that endangers health and safety, including serious property damage. And this is the key. Violence or endangering activity must be done in whole or in part for a political, religious, or ideological purpose, with the intention to intimidate the public or a segment thereof as to their security. So, as a former journalist, I'm acutely aware that people often assume that all mass shootings and stabbings and bombings are terrorism, and they get really angry when you don't immediately use the T word, but it's only terrorism if it's meant to create terror for a political, ideological, or religious reason. And I gotta say, as a civil libertarian, I'm actually pretty leery of governments listing groups as terrorist groups because, by definition, people are, getting together for political, religious, or ideological reasons. And in a free society, we need to be alert to the government trying to use the power of the criminal law to prevent people from organizing. One of the main reasons we have freedom of expression and freedom of association is so you can get together and organize and potentially replace the government if you need to. So it's very easy for authoritarian governments to just, designate their political opponents terrorists, to then, disband them, shut them down, even if they don't pose any actual risk of violence. And in fact, I think that may have been something we saw a bit during the pandemic. So after the January 6th attack on the US Capitol, which involved some members of a group called the Proud Boys, you may recall, the Trudeau government designated the Proud Boys a terrorist group, and this got a lot of praise from the political left, especially in the United States. But I'm not sure whether they were actually terrorists or not. For those who don't know, Proud Boys was founded by the former Vice magazine co-founder Gavin McInnes, and they're definitely a sexist group. They're definitely a racist group. They're very pro-Trump. They're very anti-lockdown. And before January 6th, they were basically famous just for showing up at Black Lives Matter protests to occasionally brawl with the far left group Antifa, which is apparently not a terrorist group. So they're not really nice people. They're bad people in a lot of cases, but terrorist seems like a stretch to me because there wasn't, a lot of serious violence tied to them. So just an example of what can go wrong. It's also worth noting that the Trudeau government also essentially labeled the trucker convoy participants terrorists, since that was the official reason that they selected out of the Emergencies Act, even though they didn't mention, any particular terrorist group or give any evidence whatsoever of connection to a terrorist group. So again, that just goes to show how careful we have to be with these definitions. All that said, I do think it's very reasonable to list Samidoun as a terrorist group based on its linkages to the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. So, according to Public Safety Canada in their listing from Tuesday, Samidoun claims to be campaigning for the release of Palestinian prisoners, but the prisoners tend to be terrorists who have killed civilians. And the Public Safety Canada says their ideology revolves exclusively around the worldview that Israel and Zionism are the greatest danger to the Middle East and the world, and their main goal is destruction of Israel, essentially genocide. So, to achieve this goal, Samidoun advocates violence, and they also say, according to Public Safety Canada, that they do this through social media and public protests. The U.S. State Department goes a little bit further and is much more plain in their language. They say Samidoun is, quote, a sham charity that serves as an international fundraiser for the PLFP. So Terry Glavin at the National Post, he's been covering Samidoun for years and doing really important investigative journalism work. It's been obvious from the beginning, if you read Glavin's columns, that the PFLP is closely connected to Samidoun. And, they've organized lots of protests in Canada, but in particular in Vancouver, which is where their North America director, Charlotte Cates, lives. And Cates was arrested on April 29th after a speech she gave at the Vancouver Art Gallery, where she led chants of Long Live October 7th, praised Hamas, praised Islamic Jihad, praised Hezbollah, called them resistance fighters. But she wasn't actually ever charged with a hate crime because, we don't really know actually, but that ball is in the court of the BC Attorney General. Anyway, Cates is married to Khaled Barakat, who, according to the US and Israel, is a leader in the PLFP. And the PLFP, or PFLP, pardon me, is indisputably like this Marxist terrorist organization that aims to destroy Israel. They hijacked planes in the 1970s. They were involved in gunning down dozens of people at Ben Gurion Airport. They blew up a synagogue in 2014. And so they're really as terrorist as you get. So anyway, Samidoun is widely understood to be their Western fundraising and propaganda arm. And the propaganda has been disturbingly successful, I might add. I saw one keffiyeh-clad University of Alberta professor on Twitter last night actually defending them. And so, look, I think it's a good idea to list them. It's a really good first step, but we need to see some action next, like some arrests and hopefully deportations. Christine, I know you're going to talk about another person who's likely to be labeled a terrorist any day from now, Jordan Peterson. But before we get into that, what do you think about all this listing Samidoun as terrorists?
So Samidoun seems to be a horrible, horrible organization. And let's make it very clear that they are not being listed as a terrorist organization because they chanted death to Canada, even though that is obviously disgusting. They're not being listed as a terrorist organization because they burned a Canadian flag, which is also terrible. Those things you are allowed to do those things. They're being listed as a terrorist organization because of their connections to a terrorist organization that is notorious for hijacking aircraft and terrible, terrible things. It's also, I don't think you mentioned this, but the head of Samidoun Canada, this woman Charlotte Cates, just recently went to Iran, where she was given a human rights award in front of the Iranian judiciary. And I kind of think if Iran is honoring you for your human rights work, like the regime thinks you're doing a good job on human rights, that means it's like opposite day. It's like if Iran says you're doing something good for human rights, it means you're doing something really bad for human rights. That's just my take on it. So I think that Samidoun, this listing of them as a terrorist organization, I think that that's a good move. I agree with all of your concerns that we need to be careful when we use the language of designating something as a terrorist entity. You don't just list something that you don't like as a terrorist because you don't like them. I mean, here there seems to be a pretty clear-cut connection to a group that historically engages in violence, that calls for terrorist violence, and is an active violent threat, the PFLP. So let me talk about Jordan Peterson now, one of our other favorite topics on the podcast. So this is a not reserving judgment favorite. As I'm sure all of our listeners are familiar, unless they have been living in a closet with their eyes shut and their fingers in their ears, Jordan Peterson has been in a big fight with his regulator, the College of Psychologists for Ontario. And he was in trouble for tweeting some things that the regulator didn't like. Some members of the public complained about him. And the regulator said that for Peterson to keep his license as a psychologist, he would need to do social media training, which Peterson has called re-education. I think that that's accurate. I've written about this a lot. I've talked about this a lot. You can read this big paper that I wrote for the Macdonald-Laurier Institute about professional regulators and the threat that they pose to freedom of expression. Jordan Peterson said that this re-education was a form of discipline. Now, the college said it wasn't discipline. It's an interim step. It's about re-education and remediation. He steps away from discipline. That claim was always pretty sus. I think it was discipline. Peterson thinks it was discipline. Some legal scholars who I cite in that Macdonald-Laurier Institute paper, they think that this is discipline. And the issue here is that the college is essentially disciplining a member of their profession for speaking about social, political, and cultural issues that are unrelated to the practice of psychology. The regulator of psychologists should really only be regulating speech of their members that is off duty if it relates to the practice of psychology. Like if the psychologist is using speech to, for example, sexually harass a client, or I mean, that would be within the practice. So that's speech that would be subject to regulation. Or if, say, the psychologist is saying something like drinking this snake oil that I make and sell is the only cure for your depression, that would be something that the regulator could get involved in. There's no nexus here between Jordan Peterson's thoughts on climate change or if certain models are hot or not and the practice of psychology. He is entitled to hold his opinions about that, whatever you think about those opinions, whether you agree or disagree. We live in a society where people have different viewpoints and they're allowed to hold them even when they enter into a regulated profession. So he obviously lost his case. We were involved as an intervener arguing for a broad protection for the right to freedom of expression. He was not successful. He was supposed to do this re-education for an indeterminate amount of time, and he was supposed to pay for it himself with a regulator that the college was going to propose. And they were supposed to provide Peterson with some options, and it was supposed to happen within, I think, 3 months of the decision, or he would lose his license. So there are a few updates. Peterson said he would do the training, but now, to our great shock, perhaps not, the college can't find a re-educator who is willing to train Jordan Peterson. And I think Peterson actually made the right strategic decision here in agreeing to do the re-education. I was initially surprised that he said he would do it. First, because he said he would never do it. And then he said he would. And I was surprised he would do it because I just think that that would not go well. But I guess that's sort of the point, that he wants it to not go well. The choice was the right strategic move because now the college can't find anyone and they're in this really awkward position. So Peterson has written about this in the National Post, and he says that previously the college gave him a list of social media experts, whatever that is supposed to mean. I mean, there is no such thing as a social media expert. That is not a profession that you can get accredited in. So no one even really knows what this means. But the list that the college gave Peterson had the names and contact information for these supposed experts blacked out. So we don't even know who they are. Now Peterson says that the college has told him there has been, quote, administrative confusion, and those so-called experts are not available now. And
Administrative confusion. That's a new one.
yeah, I know, right? So they have asked for a three an extension to that 3 month waiting period for the training. So they've given an extension to themselves. Now, while they gave themselves this extension, they also reached out to Peterson to try something else. They asked if Peterson would just give up his license if they agreed to drop I think it was $24,000 in costs. So he had been ordered to pay the costs of the college for his appeal to the Supreme Court that was unsuccessful. Um, this is insane. Peterson is not gonna he spent over $500,000 at the lower level fighting this. Like clearly cost is not the issue here. This is about principle. He already spent over 600 grand fighting this. He's not going to give up his license now for $24,000, which is like less than what he would, a lot less than what he would get for a single speaking engagement. So, like, why would he agree to do this? This is just like a really weird and desperate offer. Also, I thought the point wasn't to come after his license. I thought the whole point was re-education, and this isn't discipline, it's a remedial step. But now suddenly the college does want his license after all. So obviously Peterson refused this weird offer from the college. Um, they told him they can, and then after giving him this offer and going through this waiting period where they're going to find a new social media expert, after the offer was refused, they told him, we actually can't find a social media expert at all. So now we don't really know what is going to happen. I mean, there's a couple of options. The college could just keep giving themselves extensions in this waiting period, I suppose. I don't know if Peterson can bring some sort of administrative challenge because they may have to continue giving themselves extensions. We're gonna have to see. In the absence of some so-called social media expert, maybe they're going to just appoint someone internally from their own bureaucracy to do this job. That Peterson has said he thinks that might be an option, or maybe they'll try and find someone who has never heard of Jordan Peterson and might agree to do this. I think that is highly unlikely because even if you hadn't heard about Jordan Peterson up until now, if you were going to sit down and do this, you would probably look up the information about the person you're now going to be re-educating, and you would learn that Peterson has said he's going to publicize everything that happens in this retraining or re-education, and he'll try to record it. So another concern Peterson has raised is he's afraid that, or I don't think he's afraid of anything, but he is concerned that the college may try to prevent him from recording re-education, that they will make the entire process secret, which he would have a huge issue with because his whole purpose of agreeing to do the re-education is that he wants to make public what happens. And I think making the process secretive would probably undermine public trust in the regulation of psychologists more than Jordan Peterson's opinion on climate change or the trucker convoy or whether someone is hot or not. So that is what is happening with the Jordan Peterson case. I find this whole thing so fascinating. I cannot wait to see what happens next. I'm not at all surprised that they couldn't find someone who's willing to do this. It sounds like it would be quite the experience to try to tell Jordan Peterson what he should tweet. Josh, what do you think? What do you think a social
Christine,
media expert is?
I mean, you have like tens of thousands of social media followers. Maybe you could volunteer. I think you'd be actually really good at that. I would love to see that. So, you should write to the college right after this. Somehow I
No,
feel
I
like they
think
wouldn't pick you
Peterson and
though.
I would just sit down and bro out.
Yeah,
I'm really
probably.
into him.
I was amazed when I read this article, like just yeah, it's unbelievable. So I tweeted about it, and most people are on Jordan Peterson's side. They understand that this is a really big freedom of expression issue when, the most famous psychologist in the world can't, give his opinions on, climate change or transgender medicine or whether or not the prime minister's chief of staff was a prick and all of these things. Like
You
they
forgot
get
hot or
it.
not.
Oh yeah, well that one was a little offensive, but I think you should be allowed to
I
say
know, I
it.
hate that one.
That one I give a big eye roll to, but anyway. But there are some people that say like, look, you signed up for this profession. You knew that the rules are that you have to be, civil or whatever, and that you have to like toe the line, and you can make your arguments, but you can't make them the way that you made them, which is, too mean and too forceful. Um, like really people like half of people are in these regulated colleges at this point. There's like a college of massage therapists, there's a college of psychologists, there's lawyers, doctors, like everyone these days is in one of these colleges, and so that means most of the population is not going to be able to speak about issues in the culture that they think are important or political issues, or risk having their colleges, their entire livelihood essentially taken away from them. Because, Jordan Peterson will be fine, but if you're like a regular psychologist in some small town and you get your license taken away, you're gonna lose your income, potentially lose your house. So it's really serious stuff. It's a really big problem, and yeah, I think the College of Psychologists is already sort of coming out as the loser here because people can see how ridiculous this whole process was. I also think you mentioned in the piece that his fees or the college's fees have gone up
Mhm.
substantially in the past year, and he thinks this might have to do with all their litigation. I'm not so sure about that, but it must be really frustrating for your average psychologist to get that bill after seeing them go through this very public fight with Jordan Peterson for no good reason. So hopefully they push back in the future. I think that's enough about that. Maybe we'll do our bad legal takes. Well, let's take a break first, and then when we come back, Christine, give us your bad legal take.
So my bad legal take this week goes to one of our YouTube commenters. So I put up a video, as you probably all know, I think we talked about in the last podcast. We filed our materials in the Emergencies Act case. The government is appealing their loss. We've filed our materials in response to that appeal. And so I posted a YouTube video explaining the case and explaining what happened when the Emergency Act was invoked in response to the Freedom Convoy. And we got a comment in response to my video that said, thanks for showing yourself to be terminally tribal. The implementation of the Emergencies Act was passed by Parliament, not the quote, Trudeau cabinet. Have a nice life. So in my video, I had talked about how Trudeau and the cabinet had invoked the Emergencies Act, and then they'd issued all of these regulations under it. And I guess this person thinks that me stating that fact is somehow tribal, which I guess they mean partisan. They think I'm like attacking Trudeau. The problem is that they are wrong. The proclamation of the emergency was issued by cabinet, who had delegated that power to Trudeau personally. Like Trudeau issued the proclamation. It's entirely correct when I say this was done by Trudeau and his cabinet. There was a vote in Parliament affirming the decision to invoke, but the decision to invoke lies with cabinet. That is explicitly laid out in the Emergencies Act in Section 17, Sub 1. So cabinet issued the proclamation, specifically the Prime Minister. Cabinet enacted the regulations under the Emergencies Act, the emergency measure regulations, and the emergency economic measures that froze bank accounts. So I don't know if you're going to come at me, you really should make sure that you are correct, because I think that it's really embarrassing to come out someone and be like, you idiot, you're wrong. the Trudeau cabinet didn't do this, Parliament did it, when it was the Trudeau cabinet who did it. Like, don't act so smug and condescending and call me names when you're wrong. Like, be right. The good thing about this is that it gives us an opportunity to tell people how this legislation works and to talk about it. So every mistake is an opportunity to learn. Mr. Blank name, who I blacked out, but I posted this exchange on our YouTube channel, so you can go and see my takedown of this person. And there's lots of nice comments from our fans responding to this exchange. So go check it out.
Yeah, sounds good. And by the way, for everybody who donated to our Emergencies Act campaign last week, thank you so much. We raised the money that we needed to raise in that campaign. And yeah, people really responded well to it. So we have really great fans and donors.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys.
So my bad legal take is a double bad legal take this week, and both of these bad legal takes relate to Windsor, Ontario. And usually we're asking like, what's up with Niagara, since we have multiple beefs with them over the Constitution. But this week it's Windsor we're picking on. So these two are also related. So my first one goes to Windsor Police Chief Jason Belair, who caused a commotion by suggesting at a meeting that police are just not interested in having their staff do paperwork for retail theft reports that nobody wants to do anything about. And this caused a stir because there seems to be like a theft epidemic across Canada, and in particular in Windsor. And the Retail Council of Canada, a lobby group for retailers, says, correctly in my view, that police shouldn't be making the call about whether they're even going to take reports of thefts. And it's true, police have limited budgets and they need to decide how to spend those, and might not always make sense to investigate every shoplifting incident, but they should be at least taking the reports, because if they don't, we won't know how big of a problem shoplifting is, or, how many of these cases are being solved, or if anybody's being punished for shoplifting. So bad legal take there. But I do have some sympathy for the police chief, because a lot of crimes aren't being taken very seriously when they hit the criminal justice system and encounter crowns and judges who are often too lenient on people. And that leads me to my second bad legal take, which goes to a Windsor crown. I don't know which one. What happened was a 55-year-old man was charged with 14 mischief offenses after he went around allegedly smashing business windows in Windsor, a crime that seems to have also exploded in recent years. In my neighborhood, I see businesses with smashed windows all the time. It's not something you used to see. And this smashing spree really bothered the community. And so they were relieved when somebody was finally arrested. And now they've learned he's getting off with no jail. So this guy pleaded guilty to 4 of the 14 window smashings. And he also agreed to rehab, which he's already done, and to pay restitution to 8 of the businesses. But he's on disability, and everybody kind of agrees that he probably won't actually be required to pay. So this is also not some, drunk street person who was so frustrated with their life and their addiction that they went around smashing random windows. This was actually somebody who drove around targeting businesses with metal bolts. And it's also somebody who has a record for arson and for assault. And yet the Crown agreed to no jail time, and we don't really know why. The Windsor Star reporter who covered this story did a pretty good job. They contacted businesses who were targeted, and surprise, surprise, they are not happy that somebody who smashed 14 windows and caused $13,000 in damages is just going to get away with no jail time. So I feel like we need to bring back the concept of, if you do the crime, you should pay the time. And if this guy spent at least a little bit of time in jail, that might scare him more into not doing it again. And even if not, that would have been time where he's not out on the streets smashing windows in Windsor. So that's my bad legal take, and that's the end of the show. And if you didn't like it, I hope you have a nice life. As usual, we hope you'll rate us, review us, and subscribe. And you can support our work by visiting our website, theccf.ca, where you can sign up for our newsletter, The Freedom Update, from our colleague Russ. The CCF is a nonpartisan legal charity funded by your donations, so please click that donate button on our website if you can. Thanks for listening.
We were 30 minutes.
Wow, that's short. We talked fast.
I didn't say that much about Jordan Peterson. I mean,